Kia ora everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Amit Mohi. Today I'll talk to you about Azure Virtual Networks, what are they, how to create an Azure Virtual Network, and how to create subnets inside of it. So let's dive in. To start, let's first talk about what is Microsoft Azure Virtual Network. Azure Virtual Networks, or what is commonly called VNets, is the building blocks of the Azure networking. VNets are used to connect your resources like your virtual machines to the internet, to your on-premises network, and to other resources on other VNets on Microsoft Azure. A virtual network or a VNet is a logical boundary. So devices that sit in one VNet are isolated from devices in other VNets or devices on your on-premises network or from the internet. To allow your devices in a VNet to talk to other devices outside of their VNet, you have to explicitly configure the routing. I will talk about how to configure routing for a VNet in a future video. A VNet can be segmented into what is called a subnet. Each VNet must contain at least one subnet, and it could contain multiple subnets. Devices in different subnets in the same virtual network can talk directly to each other, no need to explicitly configure the routing. For example, your virtual machine VM1 in the subnet 1 can talk directly to the virtual machine 2 in subnet 2 because they are part of the same virtual network. Each VNet is assigned what is called a CIDR IP address space. For example, in our case here, we've got the IP 10.1.0.0/16. This is the address space of the VNet. Subnets inside this VNet must use an IP address that is part of the address space of the VNet. In each subnet, we've got 5 IP addresses that we cannot use and that are reserved by Microsoft Azure. The first IP address is the .0, which is the network address, and then .1, which is given to the default gateway. .2 and .3 are reserved for Azure DNS for that specific subnet. And then .255 are used for the broadcast IP address. These IP addresses you can't assign to your resources. I will now show you how to create a VNet and subnet on Microsoft Azure portal. To start, log into the Azure portal by going to the portal.azure.com, and in the Azure portal search, type in virtual network. Click on the virtual network in the search results. This will take us to the virtual network blade. To create a new virtual network, click on the plus create, and this will take us to the create new virtual network blade. For the subscription, pick your own subscription. For the resource group, you could either pick an existing resource group or you could create a new one. For our cases today, I will pick an existing one. Next, I would need to name the VNets. So VNets on Microsoft Azure need to be given a name. I'll give it IAMX VNet. And then we'll pick the region that we want to host our VNet in. I'll pick Australia East, which is the closest to me. Next, we will pick the IP addresses of the VNet. This is what we've talked about. So in each VNet, we need to assign an address space. So in our case, we'll pick the 10.1.0.0/16 as our address space. Next, we need to create a subnet. So click on the plus add subnet, and we will call this subnet subnet 1. We'll give it the IP address of 10.1.1.0/24. And that's it for now. Our virtual network is ready to be created. So let's click on Review and Create. Azure will review our configuration and make sure everything is correct. And now we've passed the validation and our VNet is ready to be created. So let's click on Create. This will just take a second. Our virtual network is now ready. So let's click on the Go to Resources. And as you can see here, we've got the details about our VNet. So which resource group it's part of, where is the VNet located, what's the address space, and so on. If you go to the left side panel and then under the setting, click on the subnets, you would see that there is only one subnet that we created when we created the VNet. To add another subnet, click on the plus subnet to add another subnet, and we'll call this one subnet 2. We'll give it the IP address of 10.1.2.0/24 and then save it. As you can see now, we've got two subnets inside of our VNet. If you click on the first subnet, you will get more details about what the subnet, for example, the name of the subnet, the address range, and then is it an IPv4? And as you can see here, it's telling us that we've got 5 reserved IP addresses that Azure by default reserves. So we've got only 251 available IP addresses to use. What I'll do now, I'll create 2 virtual machines, one in subnet 1 and the other in subnet 2. And then inside the first virtual machine, I'll ping the second virtual machine, and this should work without us having to explicitly configure any routing between the subnets. First, let's go back to the Azure portal by clicking on Home. And then inside the Azure portal search, type in virtual machine. And then pick the virtual machines from the search results. This will take us to the Azure Virtual Machines blade. I have talked about how to create an Azure Virtual Machines in a previous video. So for more details, check that video. I'll leave it in the description below. To create a virtual machine, click on the plus create and then pick virtual machine. This will take us to the create virtual machine blade. And again, pick your subscription, pick a resource group, give your virtual machine a name, and then decide on the location where you want to host your VM. And this is the image. I'll pick the Windows 10 Pro. This is the size of the machine. I'll give it a username and a password. And I will leave the RDP port open for us to remote desktop to the machine. Of course, this is not recommended for production machines. And then I'll check the license here. And then before I create the machine, I need to just check the networking side of it. So scroll up and then click on the networking tab. And in here, you could see that the machine will be created as part of the IA Max VNet that we created just now. And then it will be part of subnet 1, which is what we want for now. And then that's all for this machine. We are ready to create it. So let's click on Review and Create, as we don't care about the other details in the other tabs. Our machine has passed the validation and is now ready to be created. So let's create it. I'll leave this machine to be created and I'll start creating the second machine. Again, from the Azure portal, search for the virtual machines and then pick virtual machines. Create the second virtual machine, pick the resource group, give it a name, pick the region, Australia, and then give it a username and a password. Confirm the license. And then go back again to the networking tab. This time I will pick subnet 2. I'll keep the VNet the same and everything else to be the same and leave the RDP port open as well. Let's click on Review and Create. Our machine is now ready to be created, so let's create it. As you can see now, our second machine is also deployed. So let's go back to Home. And then virtual machines. And as you can see, we have the 2 virtual machines that we've just created. So let's click on the first one. And this is the details about the virtual machine that we just created. So for example, which resource group, what's the operating system, what's the size of the machine, and the location, and the IP address, and so on. To connect to the machine, click on the Connect button, and then choose RDP. And from there, download the RDP file, which will contain details about our machine. And let's open up the machine. And now that we are inside our virtual machine, let's open up the CMD. Let's check the IP address of the machine. Type in ipconfig all. And this is the IP address of the gateway. And the machine IP address is 10.1.1.4. Let's open up the second virtual machine. Let's go back to virtual machines, virtual machine 2, and again to RDP. And let's download the RDP file for this one. And now that we have opened up our second virtual machine, let's open up the CMD as well. Let's check the IP address of the machine. And the machine IP address is 10.1.2. So now let's try to ping the other machine. So we are inside the second virtual machine. So let's ping the other machine, which is 10.1.1.4. And as you can see here, the ping is failing. And the reason for that is not because we need to do some routing for the VMs to talk to each other. The reason for that is that by default, Windows Firewall will block the ping for any machine. So for us to be able to ping the other machine, we'll need to go and disable the Windows Firewall. So let's just do that. I'll log into the other machine. And then let's just this is the first virtual machine. So in the search, type in firewall, and then in the control panel, under the control panel, system security, Windows Firewall, Windows Defender Firewall, click on the turn Windows Defender Firewall on and off, and then turn the firewall off for both these settings. Of course, Windows is going to complain, and this is not recommended at all. It's just for test purposes. Let's go back to the other machine. And now let's ping again. And as you can see, the ping is successful. We didn't have to do any sort of routing or explicitly configure the subnets to talk to each other. The machines by default talk to each other, although they are in different subnets, because they are part of the same virtual network. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below. And as always, stay strong. Kia kaha. See ya.